Hi, I'm Dylan Colson, and welcome to the first ever The Slaw Point of View. Now, I have always had the desire to make a podcast, but I never really went out and full out did it. And for whatever reason, I finally found the motivation to do it, and here we are. Now, what I would potentially like to cover, if I have any competence at all, which you might find out I'm not always the most competent on people, is I'd like to cover entertainment such as books, movies, shows, music, you name it, and possibly have some friends on at some point to come on and talk about these subjects with if they are so inclined to do it. I have some characters for friends that would be interesting if they decide to come on the show. I'd also like to talk about political stuff and different topics of interest that come up within society of today. I'm a follower of the intellectual dark web and a really big fan of Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, a bunch of IDW people. Now, I'm not the most politically informed person. I live in Canada and in Ontario, actually. So that's also one of the aims of this podcast, hopefully, is with any luck, I will have a better understanding of our political system as well once we get through the end of this. Or if there is an end to this, I don't know, maybe we'll never get past this first episode, so we will roll the dice and see, people. Over these notes. Hmm. I guess I should give you a little bit of a backstory on me, I guess. So, I've, ever since I was first born into this world, I was fighting my way out, trying to. My mom's umbilical cord was trying to strangle me, but thankfully I persisted and stuck my fist up underneath my chin, and thankfully I made it here today. But that's not without its hardship, of course, because that also meant that my mom and dad didn't have the money to raise me, so I was going to be put up for adoption. But thankfully, my grandparents on my mother's side of the family had adopted me, so I still got to know my family as I was growing up, which I consider as fairly lucky. But you know, it could have been a heck of a lot worse. I did tell you that. So I grew up with my grandparents there, and my in the city that I live in still to this day right now, actually called London, Ontario. So as we had a good life in North London. My grandfather was working at the Kellogg plant that used to actually be here in town before it got closed down some years ago. Uh, my grandmother would stay at home and watch over me and whatnot. She didn't really work and whatnot, so very classical couple, as it were. But I had a pretty good life with them. Um, I know, but the struggle always was going to come and hit at some point. So that was when my mom had cancer and eventually took her. That was back in '03. Yeah, 2 years after 9/11, '03. So I was fairly young. I was only born in '95, so that would have made me about 7 at the time that she passed away. So trying to rip the concept of death when you're that young is a very different type of thing to do. is not very common, I'd like to think. Well, it's probably more common than it should be, but it unfortunately is very hard to deal with. And as you'll find out, my little sister, even had to deal with that, even younger than I did. But so my mom passed away there in '03. Cut a little further along to '06. My grandpa had liver disease. He could no longer work at Kellogg's. We had to sell the house out of the north end of London, and we moved to the complexes in East London. Big, big difference. We used to live in high income housing, and then we came to the, I'd say, lower middle class. So with that being said, my childhood kind of got flipped upside down, and I began to get lost in East London as the times went on. My grandpa would eventually get a liver transplant, but it would fail on him. Would have been '08 there, February of '08, I think it was. So that unfortunately happened. So, but there was the blessing also of my little sister. It's not like my life is all glum. So my little sister was born there, and I think, yeah, she was born, I think, that year in '08 as well, because she would have visited one time before, or, yeah, it was in '08, because she would have visited one time before my grandfather would have died. So, yeah, I'm always thankful for her. She's a very intelligent young girl that is growing up and making me proud as far as I can tell from as a brother. But we don't obviously see each other as often because I didn't really get to grow up with her. So that there's always that, and I'd like to hopefully repair that relationship. Hopefully, as time goes on. So after that, it would have been a couple years of quiet in my life, although I kind of fell down a rabbit hole of getting into bad habits and falling into bad crowds. But I would eventually also get hit with another form of tragedy, which would have been the bicycle accident, which tragically took my father back in 2011. And to cap it all off, my grandmother that raised me died in 2017 after I found her after she had a heart attack. So I had a lot of loss in life, but I've never let that deter me from trying to be a good, positive person and try to keep up with the positivity that goes on in this world. And I really would like to try and keep that positivity going. That's what I've learned through people like Jordan B. Peterson and other people that have been a moral compass to me to actually push and strive to do better. So with that being said, I would like to further discuss and get into these subjects, and hopefully I'll have some friends on to come on and talk about these things, as well as other things like entertainment, like I suggested, and get into some deep, thoughtful conversations to really push forward the dialogue and actually make some sense of this big clusterfuck that we were all in. So I believe that will be the short introductory podcast to introduce you to me, and hopefully we'll see you again. This is the Slaw point of view. Oh no.